Today we're talking about recovery for peri and postmenopausal females and why it is so important that you recover sufficiently as part of your training regime. My name is Brad. I'm from CoachParry.com, where we help you become fitter, faster and stronger. And I'm going to be joined today by the head of our female athlete program at CoachParry.com, sports scientist Shona Hendricks. And we're going to dig into exactly why recovery is so important and also how to know that you've recovered sufficiently enough. If you get any value out of this video, we'd love it if you smash the like button. If you've got any questions, please feel free to pop them into the comments below as well. Let's head over to Shona. Shona, it's great to catch up once again, and we're talking recovery today, particularly for postmenopausal females. Let's just dig into why it's so important, particularly as we get older. For postmenopausal females, why is recovery so important?
Yeah, Brad, I mean, recovery is important across the board, for all athletes of all ages or all runners of all ages. And the reason is, and I'll touch on why even more so for menopausal females, but the reason why recovery is important is that what a lot of people don't realize is that you're not getting the gain of that running and that fitness while you are running or while you're doing that strength training. Essentially, while you're doing that, the body is actually breaking down. And so you're only getting the benefit of that running or that strength session when you are recovering. And because how the body works is that you do something and there's muscle fiber breakdown and the body sort of realizes, wow, I don't like feeling like that. And so it builds itself up, it gets stronger, and so it can handle that load next time. And that's how fitness progression works essentially. The reason it becomes absolutely critical, imperative for peri and postmenopausal females is because when you're getting older, there's so much more lean muscle mass loss. You take longer in that recovery process to get that adaptation. And so we really just need to figure out how we structure your training plan and where we get the right sort of recovery modalities in. Because if you don't put that recovery in at the right time, you're just going to break down more and more and more, because we can't necessarily bounce back the way we used to when we were a little bit younger.
Shona, that's such an important point you make. And I think it's one that so many people miss, and I know from my experience that it took me forever, years, to actually, when the penny dropped, I went, that's how it works. And for so many people, they feel like they need to be training really hard because that's where the benefit's coming from, is in that session. But you're saying that's not actually the case.
Yeah, spot on. And that's it, right? We feel like, let's use this example of when you're studying, right? So when you're actually studying, that information is hopefully going into your head. Doesn't work like that with exercise. Essentially, the body is breaking down as you're doing that running exercise. It's hard on the body. When you're lifting that weight, your muscle fibers there's muscle fiber breakdown. And while you're running as well, the muscle fibers are tearing. They create these little micro tears. And so when you finish that, you're not actually building the muscle up while you're doing that exercise. It requires you to have some rest period, and then the body does its amazing things, and it goes through all the physiological processes, and it builds itself back up. And so in the muscle in particular, those little micro tears that happen, actually the body comes in and makes it stronger. And so that's how we land up getting stronger and stronger and fitter and fitter. And it's not while you're actually doing it, it's in that recovery process. And that's also why we need to utilize things like nutrition, which plays such a vital role in recovery, because we need to use the right sort of nutrition to help the body and those muscles resynthesize and all the rest from there.
It took me a long, long time to actually understand that fully, but once the penny dropped, and it was like a light bulb went on, which was amazing. Shona, you mentioned that as we get older, it becomes harder and harder, and we've got less wiggle room, if you'd like, to get this wrong. It's often said that you shouldn't train children the same way you do adults, and I'm guessing the same way applies to postmenopausal females. If you're a 60-year-old female, you shouldn't be training the same way you were when you were 20.
Yeah, exactly. When you're 20 in your 30s, your hormonal structure works in a specific cyclic kind of manner, the very cyclic sort of way. And so as you're getting older, when you're in perimenopause, hormones are fluctuating a lot. And then in postmenopause, there's actually a baseline or those hormones just sort of flatline, not baseline, flatline. And so what we're looking at there is that you can't expect to train the same way you did when you were getting those hormone responses from training with those hormones, now that the hormone structure is very, very different. And so we need to adjust the way we train for that matter. And we have to put in more recovery so that we can allow for more adaptation in that point. And in the same way, so that's from a female perspective of training the same way you were in your 30s to in your 50s and 60s. the same thing applies as a general comparison to how we train males and females. A lot of the science has been done on males athletes and male collegiate athletes. That's where that all sort of came from. But it's starting now to improve on some female athletes, but we're figuring out more and more that we have we know we have an entirely different hormonal structure, and we're figuring out that we need to then train female athletes in a different way. And then the division there as well between, or not division, but the difference between training a younger female athlete versus a female athlete whose hormonal structure is going through a lot of changes as well.
Hey, if you want to find out more about this, and make sure that you check out, we've got an upcoming masterclass called the Running Through Menopause Masterclass that we're going to be going through this principle and 4 others, essentially, that make up Shona's Running Through Menopause training framework. So click on the link that's on the screen now. Make sure you save your seat. And yeah, we'd love to have you in there and just go into this in a lot more depth. Shona, when you talk about recovery, do you mean doing absolutely nothing? Is it a couch or sofa day? Or when you talk about recovery, what do you actually mean?
I like to look at recovery in 2 kind of aspects, almost like an acute version of recovery, and then perhaps a bit more chronic side. So no, it's not about doing nothing. But if let's look at it in a smaller sort of aspects. That's recovery that's taking place straight after your session. So you do a session, you make sure that you get some good nutrition in within 20 to 30 minutes after that session. You ensure that your sleep is got good sleep hygiene, we call it. So you're getting enough hours of sleep, you're getting good quality sleep. Those are little things that you can do. And those 2 things are imperative for recovery. The add-ons, the compression garments and the other things are very subjective, and every person will find out what works for them. But then on a bigger sort of scale, or what would then in your micro cycle and your weekly cycle would term, you're not necessarily doing nothing in that lower week where we're bringing things down for that recovery. You can use things like active recovery. So cross training is an excellent idea. Doing lots of mobility work or something like yoga is also awesome. And the cross training is nice. The things I'm referring to there, things like cycling and swimming, because those are non-weight bearing, but you're still getting that recovery aspect where you're working on the aerobic system at that time. But there's space in that plan for a recovery day, a rest day, let's put it that way. So I really like to have 1 full day of recovery in a plan. And the way I like to almost refer to that is that athletes must start seeing that rest day as a session. It's the exact same thing as when you get up and going running for the day. You must treat that day or that rest session as exactly that. And then, if we're looking at more of a micro cycle weekly, I like to, as females start getting older in their 50s, when all these changes are happening, we like to adapt that weekly cycle from a 3-week build and then bringing it down to a 1-week recovery, more towards a 2-week build and a 1-week recovery, just again to allow for more adaptation to happen. It's not about taking things out of the plan necessarily. You still be doing the same amount of work. You're just getting an extra sort of aspect for recovery.
Shona, recovery, it's hard to monitor. It's I don't want to say it's subjective. There are ways that you can do it, but how do you know you've recovered sufficiently?
Yeah, there's a number of different physiological metrics that we can use. I really like to use a couple of things. So I don't only focus on something like heart rate. So resting heart rate's a great metric, but that in its own, I always like to have quite a holistic view of things. So heart rate, pace, distance run, and then a really big one for me is rates of perceived exertion. And when you're using all of those sort of things, so rates of perceived exertion, how hard you're working in that session and how you're feeling in that session. So when you're using essentially internal kind of physiological variables, heart rate, how you're feeling versus some external variables like pace and distance, and you can match those, then you get a really nice picture of how you are doing, feeling and recovering. But an even simpler way of doing that is just if you're arriving at every session feeling exhausted and tired and your legs are heavy, you're not recovering correctly. We also like to almost use a bit of a stair test. So if you're walking up a flight of stairs and by the time you get to the top, you're exhausted and your legs are heavy, very high chance that you're not recovering correctly. Those are basic sort of tests that you can just give yourself. Then the metrics also move all the way across to something a little bit more in depth, like heart rate variability and monitoring that over time, which is really a great tool to use. Perhaps for menopausal females, though, just taking into account that your heart rate responses change as you're going through peri and postmenopause. So that's why never just use the one metric of heart rate, because your heart rate response does become essentially, your resting heart rate response is a little bit higher than it was before. And so we don't want to just use that one metric. We always want to have a nice holistic view of recovery.
Thanks so much for joining us. As you heard earlier on in this video, we are hosting a Running Through Menopause Masterclass shortly. If you'd like to register, it's absolutely free. All you need to do is click on this link over here. Also, make sure that you subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. You can subscribe to that over here. And you can also watch our latest video over here. And be sure to check out our most popular video over here.